Okay, so welcome and thank you for coming to today's lessons learned from the 2021 HWW Grand Research Challenge selection process. I'm Maggie Nettesheim Hoffman, Associate Director for Career Diversity for the Humanities Without Walls Consortium. And it is my great honor and privilege to welcome back to Marquette our PI for HWW, Dr. Antoinette Burton, and also Dr. Jenny Davis, the HWW Consultant on Ethical Methods and Reciprocal Community Partnerships and Director of the American Indian Studies Program at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and welcoming them back to Marquette for this conversation to help our faculty and other partners on campus as they think about their 2022 Grand Research Challenge grant questions. I have curated a question to guide us in our conversation, but we really want to make this informal and help all of you think about best practices or considerations and thoughts as you structure your grant programs, or if you consider applying for a Sea Grant from Marquette this year. Drew, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before we get started as well.
Yes, the main thing would just to thank our presenters, Antoinette and Jenny. I think this is going to be really helpful for our faculty. We had a really good round of applications last year. One of the things we also realized is that I think our faculty are really hungry to participate in reciprocity and redistribution. And I found a lot of faculty who maybe didn't have the language for that and were kind of growing into that, but already had kind of the ideas for it. We were just calling it different things. And so I think that through learning more about the process and how to instantiate that, especially in terms of the budget, I think it's going to be extremely helpful for our faculty. And so just thank you again for taking the time to help us today.
Great. So with that, I thought I would ask my question for Antoinette and Jenny, which is, what did you learn about reciprocity and redistribution as methodological approaches as you reviewed the grant applications for the 2021 round of funding last fall?
So I'll start and by thanking everyone for being here and thanking Maggie for giving us this opportunity, which we're very grateful to have. And also to, for those of you who don't already know her, Peggy Brennan, who is our Assistant Director for Operations at HWW. And she is the glue that holds this whole thing together. And she knows as much, if not more, about any of this than we do. So thanks, Peggy, for being here and helping us out as we try to explain the things that we've learned. So I think what I would begin by saying is that there is a great will to embrace the moral call of reciprocity and redistribution, and not always an operational understanding of what that could or should look like. And I think that humanists are very good at responding, at call and response to some degree. Here's the call, here's our response, here's how we are responding to what you're doing, and here's how we're thinking about reciprocity and redistribution. Here's how we're declaring our commitment to it. Here's how we are trying to embed it in the work that we're doing. And I would say that of the 37 applications that we got in the first Grand Challenge research round, I mean, everybody participated in that narrative commitment more or less successfully. I mean, obviously not 100%, but people do think they know what it is. The harder part is actually embedding that set of practices in the breadth and depth of the application. I would, and we can talk about that in a minute. I would put a small footnote there, maybe a qualifier to my own claim there. I guess what I would say is reciprocity and redistribution we're often contoured onto pre-existing ideas of what that might look like, depending on the applicants or the team's own research or own disciplinary or interdisciplinary vocabulary. It didn't necessarily always match exactly what we were thinking, and the place where that might sort of grind to a halt was with respect to what the relationship was with the partner, whether community org or otherwise, and whether the research question really had been co-designed and co-generated. I think there was a synergy or a kind of something we could map between those who had seed grants and those who had not. So a surprising number of people in the application pool rolled up with absolutely no contact with us. And given how available we were and all the outreach that we did in the year leading up to the application deadline, it was kind of surprising that there were people who just, you know, appeared on before our sight line, and we were like, who are you? And also significantly, there were a number of people who had seed grants that we had conversations with who, to their credit, said, actually, this is not what we're doing. Or we told them, actually, you're not doing this. You could do this in this other way. And they were like, actually, not so much. Thank you so much. And I think that was super interesting to us too. So the match, it's not like we're asking for an exact match, but the contours obviously varied. So I would say in a very generic sense that we are looking for that co-design along the length and breadth of the narrative. And we did read for that across all the aspects of the application, including across the CVs and the budgets of the people who submitted. And I don't know, Jenny, that might be a good segue to you, or feel free not to do the call and response. Feel free to go off down some other piece if you want.
No, I mean, I think that's, yeah, I mean, part of it is, you know, not treating reciprocity and redistribution as a kind of buzzword, but as a kind of real, like a commitment and things that are working. And I think that projects, you know, from what we could tell based on reading them, the strongest projects were the ones that I think had that kind of built in as a core principle from the get-go, whether or not they were using those words, right? So there are a lot of people who use approaches that might seem that way. Less successful in projects where it seemed like a already an existent project where they kind of tacked in the requirements for the grant afterwards. And I think very tellingly, a lot of the questions, some of the questions we got in those regards were asking about like the minimum requirements of a partner or the minimum definition of something rather than it being the best example of something, right? So thinking about, you know, and ways that seemed maybe not to take to heart some of the questions, right? So, you know, redistribution or reciprocity, it's probably not happening if your partner is a government agency, a well-funded government agency, for example, right? So, you know, thinking about some of those dynamics. So not a buzzword, not superficial, much like Antoinette said. I think the other thing that's probably the main challenge is that it's not one size fits all. And so in fact, they looked really different from each other. So like the best articulation of who's involved and what the project looks like and who the funds are going to and what the funds are funding have to all make the best sense for the project and have come out of the conversation with everyone. And because, you know, community orgs in different contexts need and look very different than an MSI, than a university partner, then, right? So the ways that people configured it looked very different. And I think that might be, goes a little bit against how we're often trained to apply for grants, which is to make everything kind of fit together. And that means that some people in thinking about reciprocity and redistribution were thinking really concretely about language barriers and built-in translation as part of their budget, right? They were thinking about compensating in a redistributive way the participants in the project that would not have been compensated by some of the other areas. So I think that's, you know, an absolute area where it's really from the word go. I think it was very telling, and some of the applications had the collaboration and the consultation and the kind of determining of things still in the future tense for an application that had already been submitted. And so that means that all of those partners had not been involved in anything up to the submission. So then everything has been pre-formulated before they've even been talked to, right? In fact, the money has been determined where it's going to go before folks talk. So I think that those are all just a reiteration of what Antoinette said in that sense. It's kind of all the way through. And I think perhaps what was the most different for this grant than a lot of the other ones that we would see is that the like behind the scenes part is actually what the reviewers were interested in. So normally the methodology or how the team came together, the history of the project would not be included, would be included as a footnote, right? You're limited to this many words, you wouldn't give words to it, but that was actually really critical in explaining how people are involved and why those individuals and why the different types of funds were going to what they were going to. And so this is, a grant that has method at the heart of it. And so I think that the grant application is also far more interested in the kind of process and even anticipated process, maybe. I think that's accurate, right, Antoinette, in thinking about what they can talk about, and that it doesn't all also have to be known ahead of time. Maybe allowing, it's okay to not know exactly how everything will go down. Some of our most interesting and provocative and helpful questions from seed grant holders were about thinking about kind of budget contingencies and the fact that you wouldn't necessarily know. And that really came from the fact that they were having conversations about the budget and the project from kind of the beginning, I think. So.
Terrific. That I was furiously taking notes. I really appreciate your thoughts about all of that. I thought I would, instead of dominating your time with my questions, which were derived from those comments, I thought I'd throw it out to the group to see if you have any follow-up questions for Jenny and Antoinette. Heather, I see your hand up.
My fake hand. Yeah. Your comments are so interesting because as I tried to even imagine, okay, what kind of grant application could I pull together? All those things came to mind, like what is the methodology of reciprocity and redistribution here? And I think that I'd like to hear a little bit more about, so first of all, make side comments. It's no surprise that people package their applications, right? I mean, I was reviewing for the Ford Foundation, and the number of times you get things that just have nothing to do with anything that the call is for is very discouraging. But I think we're sort of taught that way as academics sometimes to just apply for everything. And this grant is obviously quite different in that regard in so many ways from typical grant opportunities. So what projects did you find particularly compelling, and why? Not simply if they won or not, but what were those that looked like you wanted them to and had the potential for development?
So Peggy, I think you probably can put a list of the ones that won in the chat. And there were others that came very close, and it was really hard beyond a certain point to pick only 5. But I think these really do model in subject matter and also methodology, which is a little bit harder to read for in these descriptions. But I think they all gave evidence of not being one directional, some out from a center to some space that then there was just a big echo and no sound. They did not, their budget not only properly remunerated in a kind of really equitable way whoever the partners were, but also did not prioritize university personnel, including faculty, as recipients of the grant money. I mean, obviously we want to recognize the labor of university faculty, but a budget that has, 80% of the money staying inside the university, and all of these that won exhibit real thoughtfulness around how and at what pace and through what kind of, work plan the money was moving around. And we're going to try in the next couple months as the projects get going, and particularly as they really go full steam ahead, to keep in touch with them and to hear from them, so that we accumulate, again, more examples of how they're, how they're actually putting their projects into practice. I guess what I would say a little more, I don't know if the word is sharply or maybe just specifically, is I think there's a very common liberal notion in the academy and elsewhere that we know how to do this, and we're going to go with our great ideas and walk into a community and figure out how to plant that idea and get some great response about it, and then produce, I don't know, a website or a book or something. I think the product here, there are tangible products to be delivered here, but a lot of the product is in the relationship building and the problem solving. And in the best applications, those problems get solved in ways that, can be taken away. They're takeaways, but they're also processual and relationship building. And that is something that I think in most quarters of the humanities part of the academy, even, we're not really familiar with or comfortable with, actually. And it raises questions about tenure and promotion and all those other things that I think many of our institutions are grappling with. But I guess I would just say that there are a lot of people who think they know how to do this because they think they're good people and good citizens and they're woke and they know how to do it. And in fact, they're not really thinking, they're not really reading the literature on reciprocity and redistribution, or they haven't gone the library of resources that we've offered with respect to that. And these are methodologies coming out of critical race theory, indigenous studies, and other spaces that are basically marginal in the humanities as well as in the academy. And I think that evidence of deep knowledge of that was evident in, some of the applications we saw, but not all. So I don't know if Jenny or Peggy, you'd want to say anything related to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking about the outcome or the goal, and that's what that it matches the question and the project. And I think also that the question, the project made sense for the context. And so it's not just what is the hot question of our whatever our field's last annual meeting brought to a different group of people, right? Rather than what are the questions that are happening or interests or dynamics that are going on out of the conversations of these folks. And so it might be, it's not to also automatically discount things that people might be tempted to discount. So it might be a book, it might be a kind of digital humanities project, but that it matches and kind of makes sense for the group. I think the redistribution of the inclusion of everyone from the beginning is a redistribution of power, right? And but also I think as part of that relationship building, a real recognition of everybody who's participating as having expertise and knowledge, and so that it's not just a kind of being brought in. And this is true, I would also say, we haven't talked about it yet, but the role of graduate students as co-project participants, as co-thinkers, that people are not being brought in as labor, as sources of data, as tacked on, partners that make the project fit the parameters of the grant, right? So I think it was often in places you could see that it was really strong, that there was a shared recognition of expertise, and that was, again, a part of the project development, because then what was being done by whom and how they were participating and how they were being compensated all kind of come together around that core principle.
Peggy, is there anything you want to add conceptually or operationally to this?
I don't think so.
Okay.
If I could quickly follow up, as you were both talking, it made me think about some of the context for our Sea Grant recipients who probably don't remember, but only 2 of our Sea Grants we recommended to actually apply for the full GRC last year. And as a part of that, and Drew, I don't know if I state this wrong, please correct me, but in thinking about those 2 projects specifically, and I want to kind of gain your thoughts or gather your thoughts as we shepherd in projects this year. I think last year for our faculty teams, there were 2 really important contextual questions unique to Marquette that might have influenced the way in which they interpreted or thought through reciprocity and redistribution that I want to get your thoughts about. One, for both of the projects, actually, I think that they saw themselves as members of the community with which they were partnering. And so I kind of just wanted to flush that out, because at the time, I don't know if we thought, I think maybe Drew and I thought that was a valid way to approach R&R, but if we're really trying to redistribute resources away from the university, I think it gets really tricky when our faculty see themselves as members of that community. In particular, there was one project where a graduate student for a neurodiversity curriculum development project was also neurodiverse. So I'm thinking about that, like what is the relationship between faculty as members of the communities with whom they're partnering? And then additionally, I have this question about curriculum, right? Because curriculum is so integral to Marquette and our faculty, who are all really teacher scholars and teacher researchers. It's no wonder, I think, that so many of our projects were curriculum development projects. But if we're thinking about how we redistribute resources away from the university into communities, does that mean curriculum projects might not be a best fit or in this type of methodological approach? So Drew or Teresa, if you have any thoughts about that, please share. But I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about those, especially as we advocate to our faculty. Maybe that's not the best approach to take in terms of these grants.
That's super interesting. I would say that curriculum redesign could be an outcome, but probably shouldn't be the in this grant for success. And I would say that was true across the. I mean, it isn't just the Marquette versions, but there were other examples of that, because it's mostly a benefit to something that is, if not even contained in a university, still a kind of academic centered kind of problem. And I think the idea is to kind of break out those boundaries. I don't know. But Jenny, I know you want to say
Yeah,
something.
so I think one that there are a lot of different answers to that. Because whether or not the co-PIs across the board, including at universities, at the PI institution, were from underrepresented individuals, where where funds and acknowledgement might be part of a kind of redistribution framework. That was something that was a part of the conversation for sure. Also recognizing things like, the partnership with institutions like historically Black colleges and universities, or MSIs, or right, like those are already thinking about inequities and the opportunity for redistribution in the context of higher ed institutions where access to funding, access to, again, recognition of expertise, access in general, right, all play in. So applications, it wasn't that individuals from who are underrepresented, marginalized, racialized, that it wasn't a factor. And I think how that's articulated can help. I think that it wasn't the only factor, I think, in articulating, because as a multiply marginalized scholar, I'm still in an R1. And so it's not to say that every project I do inherently benefiting me is not the same thing as benefiting the communities I might represent, right? Or the categories I might represent. So I think thinking about those things in a really a robust way and articulating them is really helpful. I think, you know, one of the goals in thinking about curriculum is, you know, if curriculum development benefits, you know, who are the students it benefits, and is that redistributive at all, right? If it's a single university context that has a very particular student demographic, right, that is very particular political histories, then is that the most robust example of reciprocity and redistribution? And I think one of the things, because we had such an unexpected and amazing number of people who submitted, like that, it's none of the discussions were, is this the minimum requirement for this conversation, but what is the most robust, amazing, incredible representation of redistribution and reciprocity. So I don't know that like curriculum would never be it, but I think curriculum that was for a potentially already well-served, overrepresented student group, or right, like I think those are all going to be questions that come up, and that, you know, one of our winning teams is a partnership between an R1 and a historically Black college, thinking about a number of programs. So again, I think it's not exclusionary, but it's how is it doing redistribution and reciprocity, rather than assuming it does because of the category of either the PIs or even the people who are the partners.
Thank you. I know that will help, especially in departments like the one that Hugh and Ania is from. It'll really help, I think, frame their projects into the future. Did you want to follow up on that at all? No. Okay.
Well, I think you answered these are very good questions. Sorry, my name is Eugenia Finnegan when we filed the neurodiversity grant. So what Maggie asked was what we were thinking. I did appreciate your points about developing deeper relationships with communities. Something that I might ask is that our project is like phased. So we applied for funding for phase 1, which would be precisely that work with community members that you specified as a prerequisite to a successful application. So I felt like we were caught a little bit because I appreciate the seed grant, but that was a short period of time to deeply work on these things. This is why we applied for something that would enable us to conduct that in-depth cooperation, you know, and integration work. Do you have any insights on that? And thank you for this meeting. It's been very, very useful.
I think that there were a number of people who received seed grants who had the same, who thought this is going to take a little longer than this timeline allows, and we're going to apply for the next cycle, I think. In part because of the time it takes to develop those relationships. And so, and I think there were a number of applications that I think I can speak for us that we hope would be resubmitted, right, and considered. But yeah, I mean, I think that the timeline from seed grant to submission was quite short. And so it's not especially surprising that that might be a thing that comes up as a barrier.
I would also say to that point about the Sea Grants, the team here at Marquette for our Sea Grant opportunity this year, we're going to distribute larger grants this year, fewer grants, but larger grants. So please, I hope that, if they applied and received a Sea Grant last year, they can apply again this year to get more funds to really work on that project. But then additionally, and I think we keep trying to say this through the center and the work with the Sea Grants, even if you don't get a GRC grant, let's work with AVRIA and ORSP and, to find other grants that might work for that project as well, because even if they don't get a GRC or it might not be the right fit for the GRC, they're all great projects. And we want to do what we can as a team here at Marquette to help get those projects funding. So just thought I would share that again. So yes, Eugenia, please encourage them to apply for Sea Grant again.
And, I think, I don't know what kind of engagement, Drew or Maggie or Teresa, you had with the Sea Grant winners, but we offered to meet with anybody who wanted to meet with us, and we did meet with at least one of your teams. Yeah. Either in the middle of that experience or, as it's phasing out and then people are ramping up for the application. I mean, we are here to help you, prepare as good an application as you can. And to answer very specific questions. I mean, we're speaking in so many generalities here of necessity, but we're also happy to meet with people team by team and hear about the details. I mean, we won't review applications, but we're happy to talk through things. And, if you have a question, how much detail should I go in here? Is this sufficiently X, Y, or Z? We can definitely give feedback on that. As somebody was talking, I was reminded of how valuable the 4-part grant writing video series that our colleague at MSU, Bill Hart-Davidson, put together is for schematizing these questions, which is to say, visualizing them and mapping them and working through the phases of grant conceptualization and then writing and execution. We just have, as Peggy put in the chat, which is so many resources that we accumulated last year that I think involve people speaking directly to some of these issues, where if the vocabulary that we're using here doesn't land, you might find resonance in those examples as well. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Like, go ahead. Yeah.
No. Okay, last year we were still kind of in pandemic land and I was still in the dean's office. And so things were very chaotic anyway, but I felt like, I guess I'd like some help in understanding how we can stimulate more applications on our campus and encourage people to apply. Ben was great sending out notices, Maggie and Ben were there all the time to remind people, but that didn't really, I don't know how, I shouldn't say I didn't see the applications. I don't know how well that yielded applications. So maybe you guys can just fill me in a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Heather, we actually received 6 Sea Grant applications last year. And as a team, as a PI team, and I see Tim, hi, I didn't say hi to you, Tim, but I thank you for joining us. And please, Tim, Teresa, or Drew, if you want to flesh this idea out a little bit for Heather. But we decided at that time, because we knew it was so new to all of our faculty at Marquette, that we wanted to spread the resources around to as many faculty projects and to support as many faculty projects as possible at that time. Just because we were trying to socialize the project, socialize HWW, and socialize reciprocity and redistribution, which I think we're all still learning, how to best facilitate those conversations on campus. But as a part of all of that, I think we've also learned a lot about Marquette administratively in terms of navigating the bureaucracy. And there are unique content. I see Teresa and Tim especially laughing, I'm sorry. But just thinking
I'm
about
laughing
the,
too, Mags.
well, you know this intimately, Heather. Just thinking through how we can support faculty whose teaching loads have increased so dramatically because of the pandemic and because of the unique budget considerations happening at the university. So one of our GRC teams, and I think that this is good overall for thinking about how we can support our humanities faculty in applying for grants, it really brought home to all of us as a team that as a part of this, we need to work with the college, especially to think about course reduction loads if one of our teams, received a GRC. And those are things that we had to learn as a PI team. So PI members, I don't know if you all want to share some thoughts about the Sea Grant process and what we learned for Heather.
And I think, excuse me, one of the things, and this builds off what Antoinette was saying before too, one of the things that we tried to do over the course of the summer, and we had a couple of online seminars with the teams that receive seed grants. The first of which was in June, and we as a team facilitated discussions among the seed grant team members. Many of them brought along partners from off campus to those discussions. We sort of walked through some of the stages of Bill's process of grant writing, essentially to get them thinking along how best to put their program together. And then we got back together again in September and had another session, shorter, but just sort of to check in and see how things were going. And I think that those were useful, but we're better at articulating reciprocity and redistribution now, I think, than we were then. And that I think could be very helpful, particularly if we have teams that are taking advantage of the larger seed grant awards this summer. They'll be able to accomplish more in the early stages. If they are reapplying, they are building off of what they've already learned, and therefore creating a better crafted application. And I mean, that this is to Maggie's point about building a culture. That's really what I think what we came to see ourselves as trying to do, is build a culture of not just grant writing, because all of us have been involved in that to some extent, but team thought and thought beyond how this benefits our classroom or our specific research, how our expertise can be utilized by people from beyond Marquette who have their own questions and concerns that need to be addressed. So that's, I think we're hopefully going to do an even better job this year.
One thing that prompts me to ask is, is there an office or is there a part of the team that actually goes through the application before it gets submitted? Sort of reading it for its strength of argument, for the way that it hits the marks of the evaluation, for pumping up. Look, there's a little tag here, but it's not a very big seed. Can you move it up? I mean, that level of almost writerly engagement.
Antoinette, Averia, I saw Averia nodding her head. So Averia, hello. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but to Antoinette's point, I think last year, Drew and I met with the teams in the run up to final application, but I think as a part of the grant team here learning how to do this, especially as I look at Drew, we might as a full PI team want to be more intimately involved if we have the labor bandwidth to work with ORSP in the construction of the grants, to just reviewing it to Antoinette's point. So Drew and Avery, I don't know if you want to share any thoughts about that.
I'll just say two quick things. Yes, all applications that go out go through our office, and we love connecting with our faculty that way and see how we can help build stronger.
Avery, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you very well.
Yeah, you're really
It's
muffled.
it's
Yeah.
just muffled and quiet.
Oh no, can you hear me any better?
It's a
little
little
bit,
better.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, closer. You get an extreme close-up of my face now. Any proposals going out the door, we're gonna wanna work with the faculty members and make sure that we can help work with them to build the best proposal possible. I know when I worked with the faculty, we ended up with proposals that had seemingly more questions than answers, which is good. That's part of this whole process, right? Is to identify those needs and work together to move those things forward. I think this conversation has really helped me so that I can hear what resonates with the reviewers. And then moving forward with this next round, we'll know like what are some key things in the budget, because it's going to be very logistical. As Maggie was pointing out, working with the PIs, they'll be able to dig more into the content. But we can look at the budget and make sure that it's speaking to what we know is going to be happening, but we want to make sure it's being reflected in black and white on the proposal, such as the budget and things like that. So very helpful for us as we review the applications going out the door the next round.
I think one of the ways that like each of the applications looked slightly different and the budgets were framed a little bit is absolutely thinking about the specificity of the institutional structures that people are at, that the PIs are at. And so some universities allow for an honorarium versus a salary versus a, right, and that allow for it to go to this versus that, or and so I think people were, when they were thinking and having conversations about what is possible, what is a good idea or not, how to structure things like the budget to be able to do the things that they want to do, that is one of the reasons why applications looked all of them looked a little different, and it might not even be using the same kinds of words for what boil down to the same essentially goal, right? So if the goal is to make sure that money is going to all of the people who are participating to the project, what is that called at your institution, and what are the rules around how that's distributed is an important question. And so, when people are including at partner institutions or partner organizations. And so those are kind of key questions that seem like they're really nitty gritty, but ended up being, I think, places where people are able to have good conversations to have as early on as possible to kind of figure that out.
For example, just to put a finer point on that even, when you calling someone a consultant may be the institutionally kind of available word, but the impression it leaves is not R&R, right? So if you have to say consultant for the sake of your ORSP, then say that, but then annotate that so that we understand that this is not about plucking or dropping in or whatever, but explain what the actual practice of that relationship will be. Because without that word sounds really disinterested and unconnected.
And thinking through defining labor on the project, Antoinette, to that point, is critical in thinking about things like access and equity and as important components in actually demonstrating R&R.
Sure. Down to where are these meetings happening? And if you don't have space rental in the community complex anywhere in this grant, it's all happening on the campus. Obviously allowing for public health protocols and all the rest, but or where is the technology money going? Who is all those questions signal intention. Unintentionally, perhaps, but they do.
Great. I see Teresa's hand up.
Yes, this is so interesting and so helpful, and it's making me wonder if our team could develop, and I don't know if this is a good idea, but I'm thinking about how can we support people in really digging deep to get a kind of mindset shift for a broader culture shift. Because what I love so much about this opportunity is not just that particular projects might get funded. I think that's really exciting possibility, but I really love the way that it's inviting a kind of institutional and culture shift at our institution and share this consortium institutions to really think differently and maybe actually do research in the humanities differently, more, you know, in this ethical model. And so I'm trying to think about ways we as a team can support ourselves and folks who want to apply for this in really doing some of that work to you know, really dig deep about these questions. And if there was some way we could develop like a worksheet or do guided workshops where we're asking those kinds of questions, like where did your questions come from? Whose questions are they? Who's like really just before you even start about, oh, I'm going to apply for this and I'm already spinning and I know what the question is, and but we have this community partner and we do community-based research, and you know, just like meta questions. Who, you know, whose questions are they? Where did they come from? Who's, and thinking about graduate students, like, you know, I don't know what it would be, but I'm just wondering if that would be a possible way to develop some mechanism. And I mean, I think Bill Hart-Davidson stuff is awesome. And Jenny, I mean, those have been so helpful to us thinking about what these things mean. I mean, I think they've been phenomenal. And then maybe taking some of that material and developing like questions and workshops to really say, look, if you're serious about this, because I'm really interested in this, I want to, you know, continue to develop it myself. Could we do something like that?
Teresa, I would love to work with you on that. I, you know, do have expertise in some of the disciplines that these things are coming out of. And I do think the culture of our institution, okay, probably no one who applied for the grant, but many people in our institution still have, you know, a very staid, hidebound notion of, you know, men and women for others service kind of stuff that I think hobbles us in these moments. But I also think that I don't know what's going on at Marquette right now, but we're not connecting with each other in certain ways. And so something as simple as, you know, 10 guiding questions, I think is such a great idea, that just to put it out, even with the call for seed grant apps, that, you know, helps people really see that we're requiring an orientation shift.
Yeah, it's about voice, it's
altogether.
about power, it's about agency and
Justice.
yeah.
It would be interesting to see that 10 questions annotated with references to any of the videos on our website or readings or readings.
Yeah.
In other words, you know, what this is grounded in practice and scholarship.
Yeah.
That people are already doing, and many people have already been doing for a long time. And it's not that this is a kind of, it's an institutional critique experience as well as institutional culture.
Exactly.
shift
Yes,
experience.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to that point too, Teresa and Heather and Antoinette, it's almost like we need a pre-seed grant process. So that, you know, because it's so often, I think what I saw last year as a part of the first seed grant was that our faculty were constructing those questions, guiding their seed grant application before they even had the partnerships formed, right? So to Jenny's point, that the question needs to be at the very foundational level, curated and constructed with your partners, which might mean that you can't apply for a seed grant. If you're asking the question as a part of your seed grant application and you haven't already talked with your partners about curating that first seed grant question, then we have to say no to that seed grant application, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you know.
And Antoinette, I wasn't suggesting that all the stuff that's out there isn't.
Oh, no, I wasn't.
And I know that.
Yeah,
I'm just saying we have an attention span limitation, I think, on our campus, or maybe everyone does. But to give this sort of fast cheat sheet that
Or just to
triggers people thinking in the right
operationalize.
direction.
I'm
Sorry,
just
go
thinking
ahead.
operationalize that space for critique and building, and then building something different in a particular institutional setting that could have broader institutional reverberation. Because Yeah, we are, you know, at R2, we've got increased teaching loads, we've got all of those things too, but then just collaboratively, can we come together and see how this might play out in our space?
I'm not going to get the Latin right, but probably. But I do think that if ever there was a, is it curia personalis opportunity here?
Yeah,
That's
this is
what
it.
R&R is. It's a contemplative discernment
Yeah,
opportunity
exactly.
that is
Yes.
critique but transformation. I mean,
Yes, exactly.
it maps. That's the local mapping.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think something to operationalize it where we're asking questions of people to make those deeper connections. And maybe to be able to see, because I think to your point, the earliest points you made about people thinking or kind of contouring these ideas onto what they are already doing, I think when that's gone on for so long, it's even when you read a literature and even when you're familiar with it, to really kind of have a sort of radical shift about what that might mean for you in your own research life and in your own institutional context can be like a radical, like a deeper, oh, that's what that means.
Well,
It's a
and-
lot of vulnerability and giving up,
also
sharing
the-
power. Yeah.
the radical contingency of this moment, and all the ways in which we talk about how everything is
Yeah.
different, but what are we actually
Yeah,
doing? And
exactly.
different for whom?
Exactly.
All that.
Exactly.
All that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't
I'm
know.
gonna have to go at 12:30. I don't know, Jenny,
Yeah.
did you want to say something else?
Well, only that I think one of the things that has come out of our conversations here and in other groups that I think what you bring up is that not everybody talks explicitly even about methodology or ethics. And so even inviting people to talk about theirs and to think of those as ongoing training rather than, so I think the other thing is people would love to come to the 1 hour training that then certifies them to go off and do R&R and everything they do, right? So I think the how to make it iterative and kind of continuative and to invite people into thinking about those methods in that way. And that I think we develop our methods our entire careers, right? Over decades of time, but maybe thinking about it from those approaches can be a really helpful framework, because I do think a lot of the conversations we have around some of these things tend to be kind of like a one and done or a kind of short engagement, but how do we create materials or have conversations that invite people into the kind of larger goal of it, right? The kind of rehaul or overhaul of things.
That point too, Drew, I wonder if this is longer structural conversations at Marquette, but I do wonder if there's opportunity for the center to think about to Teresa's point about how do we build this into what the Humanities Center does at Marquette? If we could have a running special series on reciprocity and redistribution or ethical methods in the humanities that outlive the GRC or even HWW going into the future. That's a longer term conversation though.
We love to hear it though. Sustainability. Dig where you live, as they say.
So thank you for joining us for this institutional group therapy session for Marquette University, which it feels a little bit like that is recorded. Does anyone have any additional questions or thoughts for Jenny and Antoinette and Peggy before we say goodbye to them?
I want to say thank you for reminding of the opportunity to check in with you guys about these proposals, because I know just reassuring faculty members that we can talk about contingency plans in your proposal and that is okay, I think will really, really help, because that seemed to be the biggest struggles with us, because so much of this was developing those, the end products I wrote down is that relationship building. And I know it's hard for even me to wrap my head around, well, what are the deliverables then, right? Like, how do we demonstrate to the sponsor that, yes, we're successful? So that's been helpful for me as in the office of ORSP. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Antoinette, Jenny, Peggy. I think this is one of the reasons why I love working with all of you so much. Thank you for your time and sharing your wisdom. And I will see all of you later today for another meeting. But grant team at Marquette, I wonder if you want to stay on if you have time to chat for just a couple minutes. Teresa, I see you go, no. So, but yeah, thank you so much. And
thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you very, very
Bye.
much. And Maggie, I'll catch
Bye.
up with you at 2:00. We can
Sounds
debrief a
good.
bit
We
then,
can
okay?
debrief.
All
Okay.
right, bye
Yeah, sounds
all.
good. Bye.
I'm gonna have to jump too, because I'm between
Okay.
classes and I've got that defense this afternoon. So anyway, this was really, I'm sorry I missed the first part, but the part I was here for was terrific.
Great. We've got it on recording, so we can share with everybody too. So
Cool.